So anyhow, we were very stressed. Then before the Nazis came in, before the Germans came to my town, the German in town would belong to the party, Heinlein. They burned down the temple. The police was already withdrawn from Opava. We were so-called, we went and wanted to prevent it. But the Germans, the Heinleins, they were holding hands around the temple and didn't let anybody in. And my memory is, I can see a beautiful temple in this small town was burned down to earth. So finally, naturally we didn't go back to the stores. We moved inland. And how I was saved, this girl, the friend of mine, she worked for the Gestapo in the office. And we were Czech fellows, some of my friends, we were discussing what we are going to do, where we are going to go. So somebody went to Obmarovsk, Ostrava, that is a town close by. My father found a place in Bosnia. And when I went from the meeting, I came home, I had 3 sisters. So my sister had the luggage for me. I said, what are you doing? What do you want from me? She said, you have to leave. Rosita was here, and she said that tomorrow the Gestapo will pick you up. So naturally I went. But a friend of mine was going out with my girlfriend's sister, a very good-looking guy and very successful family. They called him, but that was still the Czech Nazis, from my hometown. They tied him behind a motorcycle and dragged him to the town, and he killed him. And I don't want to go into the details. We went outside. Then I don't know if anybody, I'm sure you've seen the picture Exodus. I went on other transport. I left my parents. My mother says, if something will happen, I was the only son, the youngest, and I have 3 sisters. You get out because you're in danger. You escaped once, you might not escape the second time, and God willing, we're going to follow you. My father he didn't believe. He loved the country, he loved Czechoslovakia. He started out very little, and he was a very successful man. Anyhow, I went on one of those illegal boats. The English were shooting it out, killed a few guys. You know the stories. And ended up in Middle East, in Haifa. Lived there for 2 years, and then we found out what was happening in Europe, and my parents most probably will be in concentration camps. So I joined the British Army, and we fought, and we returned. Naturally, they all were killed in Auschwitz, and that is the end of my story. I'm the lucky one. Sometimes I feel very guilty that I live and they had to die. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thanks for doing this.
I'd just like to acknowledge the other survivors who are here today. If you could just stand for us, and we'll have an opportunity perhaps to hear your voices too. Well, that brings the formal proceedings to a close. Are there any questions?
If we accept the analogy of Munich now, this was a fairly clear-cut case of standing up to Hitler. But if you were a present-day Churchill, and if you draw an analogy to 1938 to 2008, the danger facing, what policy would you, as the latter-day Churchill, advocate in the present situation?
Well, I think the point I was endeavouring to make is that the hardest thing to do in a democracy often is to maintain a strong external policy which could involve conflict and the use of force in the face of a population that grows tired of the argument, and that is the difficulty we face at the present time. That it's terribly easy for people to say, oh look, Bush is exaggerating the war against terror, that it's not really all that bad. Does it really matter, for example, if Iran has nuclear weapons? I mean, you hear some people saying that. I mean, I think it matters a lot. It scares the daylights out of me, the thought of Iran having nuclear weapons. Now, I believe we have to persist with the approach that's being taken at the present time in relation to Iran, but you never take anything off the table, you never take any option off the table. I think in relation to Iraq and Afghanistan, of course we had to persist in Iraq, and Bush has been significantly vindicated in past months. I'm not saying that the situation may not regress. My hope is it won't. But there's an enormous difference in Iraq now from what it was 18 months ago. And yet 18 months ago he was almost alone. McCain, to his great credit, supported him. I mean, it was very courageous. He did support him very strongly. But I think the lesson you draw is that maintaining the sort of position that Churchill took in the 1930s, he swam against the tide. I mean, he started warning in 1933 of the danger involved, and that made his contribution all the more remarkable. He had a few people around him who agreed, but not many. And the point I make again is that sadly appeasement was popular because people didn't want another war. And you could understand that after what they'd suffered. And that was perfectly normal and human, and that, and just as equally now, people don't really want to think too much about the war against terror. They're getting a bit tired of it, and that is exactly what the evil people want us to do, get tired of it.
Are you aware of how uncommon a common sense statement that you made during your tenure in regards to immigration into Australia, how it affected the rest of the world, and it was just so uncommon when you said anybody is welcome to come and live in Australia as long as you can live by our rules. And if you feel you need to change them, you can just go back to where you came from. Now, this very common sense approach was very widely publicised here as well. And how do you feel in terms of Australian policy this was then integrated?
The statements I made over a number of years were really based on a simple proposition, and that is that Australia has been very open to people from all around the world. There are probably more original nationalities, if I can put it that way, represented in Australia than any other country except Israel. There's extraordinary diversity of people. I mean, often only very small numbers, but we are open, and we used to have a discriminatory immigration policy up in the 1960s. We had a white Australia policy, and that was changed in the 1960s, and we have people from everywhere. But when you come to Australia, my philosophy was you become an Australian. I mean, the Americans call it the melting pot, where you come from everywhere and you all become part of the community. Now, that expression's not used. I mean, I don't know what expression, you can use any expression you like to describe it, but my view was simply this, that we'll take people from anywhere providing they meet the criteria, and we won't discriminate on the grounds of nationality or ethnicity or race or religion, but we'll decide who comes, and we'll also decide determine that they live according to Australian law. I mean, I think this idea that you can have a federation of cultures inside one country is not workable. I mean, there's an American culture. It's been contributed to from all around the world. It's very identifiable, and I'm a great believer in defending your cultural distinctiveness. I think countries should never apologise for their culture. I don't want to live in a world where everybody's exactly the same. I rather like the idea of visiting France and meeting Frenchmen, or visiting Germany and meeting Germans, or visiting Israel and meeting Israelis. I mean, Israelis may come from everywhere, but gee, I can recognise an Israeli if I meet him. And I think that is the philosophy we ought to have. And I think we went through this stage of apologising. The West has apologised too much for its culture and its values and what it really believes in. I think that's damaging.
We're going to bring it to an end there. I think that any of the participants will be open to discussing any number of things a little later, but I want to thank you all for joining us.